Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're unpacking a highly concentrated, honestly, pretty cryptic email thread.
Oh, it is incredibly dense.
Right. It's from an entity called Beta Account, dated April 13th, 2026. And the subject line is just structure report error.
Yeah, which sounds like, the most boring corporate memo imaginable.
Exactly. But our mission today is to decode this blueprint because what it actually is a step-by-step structural outline for how to transition a conversation from just like basic everyday money
Mm.
into the extremely heavy, complex world of insurance and finance protect products.
Yeah, and on the surface, like I said, it reads like a dry outline. But if you really look at the progression of these bullet points, it's a masterclass in conversational architecture.
It really is.
Because to get someone to genuinely internalize the need to protect their financial future, you can't just, throw a spreadsheet at them.
No, nobody responds to that.
Right. You have to take them on a highly structured psychological journey that completely rewires how they perceive risk.
And the opening line of this email basically sets the entire thesis for that journey. It literally just reads, response, from money to insurance, finance, protect product,
Right.
which sounds like a simple A to B transition, but the gap between those two concepts is, it's massive.
It is a canyon.
Yeah.
Because we have to look at the behavioral economics of how the human brain actually processes those specific words.
Okay, unpack that a little bit.
So money triggers the reward centers, right?
Right.
Think about the dopamine hit of getting a paycheck or seeing a high balance in your checking account
Oh, totally. It feels great.
or making a big purchase. Money is perceived as transactional, it's immediate, it's liquid, it represents potential and freedom.
Right, it's the fun stuff.
Exactly. But insurance or protect products,
Yeah.
those trigger a completely different neurological response.
Yeah, they really do.
They represent a mortality tax. They force your brain to deal with fear, with catastrophe, loss of ability, and just, the great unknown.
It's like the difference between looking at a sleek new sports car and talking about the horsepower and the paint job, which is the money conversation, right?
The fun part.
Versus sitting in that exact same car and being forced to discuss, like, how reliable the airbags are going to be when you crash head-on into a concrete barrier at 70 miles an hour.
That is a perfect analogy, yes.
But wait, let me push back for a second. Why do we even need this covert psychological framework? We all know crashes happen, right? We all know we need airbags. Shouldn't the value of a protect product be self-evident? Why the engineered journey?
Logically, yes, the values are completely self-evident. But humans, we suffer from extreme present bias and also something psychologists call terror management mechanisms.
Terror management, that sounds intense.
It is. When we're confronted with our own vulnerability or, our inevitable mortality, our brains don't just passively accept that data. They actively deploy immediate defense mechanisms.
Like putting up walls.
Exactly. If you sit down and say to someone, hey, you need life insurance because a heart attack will leave your family destitute tomorrow, the listener's brain treats that sentence as a literal physical threat.
Oh, wow. So they just shut down.
They deflect. They'll suddenly decide, oh, the premium is too expensive, or they'll insist, I really need to think about this later.
Right. The classic, let me sleep on it.
Exactly. So this framework that Beta Count outlines, it exists specifically to bypass those immediate cognitive defenses. You can't just walk up to the front door of someone's rational brain.
They've locked the door.
Right. You have to slip in through the side window of their emotional reality.
Okay, so how do you actually do that? How do you bypass the defenses? Well, according to the email, you start by building an undeniable data foundation. To bridge the gap from the fast car to the airbags, the framework begins by establishing exactly who the subject is on paper.
Yes.
The email lists 1, demographics, and this is a very chaotic visual layout. In the source, it jumps to 3, W6, and then down to 2, sociographics.
Yeah, that visual numbering is such an interesting artifact.
Yeah.
It might indicate, the nonlinear way these elements actually interact in a real conversation.
Yeah.
But the progression from demographics to sociographics is that critical first mechanism.
Okay, break that down to us.
So demographics are your black and white facts. Age, gross income, zip code, marital status.
Just the basic stats.
Right. It's the skeletal structure of a person.
Yeah.
But the leap to sociographics that adds the flesh, the muscle, the nervous system. Sociographics map out social class, lifestyle, core values, daily habits, cultural background.
Right, so if I'm thinking about it, demographics is like knowing the exact dimensions of a house. You know it has 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, 2,000 square feet. But sociographics is knowing how the family actually lives inside those rooms. Like, are they eating dinner together in the kitchen every night? Is the living room a quiet place for reading? Or is it where everyone gathers to scream at the TV during a football game?
Exactly. It's the context.
But, okay, let's look at how modern systems actually use this. Does knowing someone's hobbies or their TV habits really change the math on an insurance policy?
Well, it doesn't change the math, but it changes the meaning of the math,
Oh, interesting.
which changes how the product is positioned. Let's run a hypothetical scenario. You've got 2 clients, both 45 years old, both making, say, $150,000 a year. Demographically, they are identical.
Right. On paper, they look exactly the same.
But sociographically, let's say client A is a single individual. They value high-risk adventure sports, international travel, independence.
Okay.
Now, client B is the sole provider for an extended multi-generational household. They deeply value traditional roles, legacy, leaving property to their grandchildren.
Ah, I see where this is going.
The meaning of that $150,000 is entirely different for each of them. For client A, a Protect product needs to frame an injury as a loss of independence.
Like, you won't be able to travel anymore.
Right. But for client B, a lack of protection is framed as a failure of duty to the family. What happens to your grandkids?
Wow, so a financial product really has to seamlessly fit into the subject's specific social reality. Otherwise, the whole concept of protection just feels abstract.
Totally irrelevant to them.
Yeah. Okay, so once you have the dimensions of the house and you know exactly how they live inside it, you need a mechanism to extract the narrative. And that brings us to that out-of-order bullet point in the email, 3W6.
Yes.
This is what I call the investigative engine of the framework.
Yeah, and the email leaves it highly abbreviated, just W6. But in structural analysis and, investigative frameworks, W frameworks are about multidimensional probing.
The classic journalist questions.
Exactly. The 6 Ws: who, what, where, when, why, and often how or which. This specific step is the pivot point of the entire conversational architecture,
How so?
because it transitions the framework from passive observation, just looking at their demographic and sociographic data, into active investigation.
Right. Think about the last time you, the listener, sat with a financial advisor or an insurance agent. Did it feel like polite small talk when they asked about your kids' college plans, or were they actually running this exact or W6 engine on you?
They usually are.
Because when you break it down, it feels almost like an interrogation toolkit. They have the suspects file your demographics, and now you're sitting across from them in the room while they ask the 6 big WA questions.
Yeah, like who relies on this income? What happens to the mortgage if you get sick?
Right. Where will your parents live if the market crashes? When does your current safety net run out? Why haven't you put a better plan in place?
It's intense.
It is. And honestly, if I'm being bombarded with aggressive why and what if questions, I'm immediately putting my walls up. How does putting someone under a bare light bulb in an interrogation room make them want to buy protection?
Well, because true security requires confronting insecurity.
Okay, wait, say that again.
True security requires confronting insecurity. What we walk around with every day is false security. It's the assumption that the paycheck will always clear, our health will always hold up.
Right, the it won't happen to me mindset.
Exactly. The W6 framework isn't designed to make the client feel warm and fuzzy or safe in that moment. It's engineered to intentionally induce cognitive tension.
Oh, so you want them to feel uncomfortable.
Yes. Remember the core objective: moving from the dopamine hit of money to the heavy reality of protection. You cannot make a human being take that leap without first disturbing their current peace.
That makes a lot of sense.
The W6 questions, they systematically dismantle the illusion that everything will always be fine. By forcing the client to articulate the answers out loud, like physically saying, I don't know how my spouse would pay the mortgage, it creates a profound temporary vulnerability.
Yeah, you can't unsay it once it's out there in the room.
Right. The cognitive tension becomes so uncomfortable that the client actively seeks a solution to relieve it.
And that tension leads directly into the climax of the email. And this is the part of the document that is truly staggering to me. Bullet point 4. Family drama question. Interviewing method per psychology intervention.
Yeah. This is where the entire architecture reveals its true nature.
It's wild.
Because up until this point, you could argue this was just a slightly intense, data-driven sales strategy. But here, The framework explicitly acknowledges that selling a Finance Protect product inevitably involves navigating family drama.
We've gone from a sterile spreadsheet to a full-blown therapy couch. You're sitting there trying to figure out a mutual fund or a life insurance premium, and suddenly you're unpacking someone's childhood trauma about their father's bankruptcy.
But that's the thing, money and family history are inextricably linked.
I mean, that's fair.
You almost cannot advise someone on long-term protection without understanding their deepest fears regarding their spouse, their children, their legacy. The framework from Beta Account, it just strips away the polite corporate veneer.
Yeah, they just say it out loud.
Interviewing method per psychology intervention. That is an outright acknowledgement that logical arguments, spreadsheets, actuarial tables, compound interest charts, they do not trigger the purchase of protection.
Right, logic doesn't sell it.
Only an emotional breakthrough does.
Okay, let's break down the mechanics of how that intervention actually works in a financial context. What does it look like when an advisor shifts into like full intervention mode?
It looks like identifying the unspoken emotional roadblock and just dragging it out into the light. Let's go back to our W-6 interrogation room.
Okay.
The client has admitted they don't have enough saved. They're feeling the tension. The intervention method requires the advisor to stop talking about the math and start talking about the psychology.
So what do they say?
They might say something like, you watched your parents lose their home when you were 12 because they didn't have a safety net. And you've been stockpiling liquid cash ever since because you were terrified of being trapped.
Oh my God.
But by refusing to lock up some of that cash in a Protect product, you're actually setting your own children up for the exact same risk.
Wow, that is devastating. I mean, it bypasses the brain entirely and goes straight for the gut.
Yes. It forces an emotional reckoning. Demographics locate the person on a map. Sociographics locate them in society. The W-6 engine forces them to articulate their precarious reality. But the family drama and the psychology intervention, they locate their fear and their love.
And fear and love are the only currencies that actually buy insurance.
Exactly. The advisor essentially has to act as a clinical therapist, breaking down those psychological barriers and confronting the interpersonal drama that dictates how money moves within a family unit.
Okay, zooming out from these incredibly intense specific steps, let's look at what this entire outline is ultimately building toward, the meta-structure of the document itself.
Right, the end of the email.
Yes, the final lines of this April 2026 email thread take a fascinating turn. After all this heavy psychological architecture, we get a new heading, A, structure of podcast, followed by a tantalizingly blank B.
Yeah, the author, Beta Account, maps this entire progression from demographics all the way to psychological intervention directly onto an audio narrative arc.
Which blew my mind.
They explicitly identify this not just as a sales tactic, but as the structure of podcasts.
It completely changes how you view the media you consume. The blueprint for selling financial protection is the exact same blueprint for keeping human attention.
Exactly. I mean, think about the mechanics of a compelling podcast, or really any long-form narrative. You always start by grounding the audience in facts, the demographics. Who are we talking about? Where are we?
Setting the scene.
Then you build out the world and the character motivations, the sociographics. Why do they act the way they do? Then you introduce the driving questions, the tension, the mystery. That's the W-6.
Right.
And finally, you hit the climax, the emotional core,
Yeah.
the family drama, and the psychological breakthrough.
That's crazy.
The human brain is hardwired to follow this exact sequence. We need the data to anchor us so we feel informed, but we stay for the drama. If a podcast just listed demographics and sociographics, you'd turn it off in 3 minutes.
It's literally the hero's journey, but applied to behavioral finance.
It is. The narrative tension of the podcast mirrors the cognitive tension of the financial framework. In both cases, the architecture guides you to a point of emotional vulnerability where you're primed to accept a new reality or take a new action.
But then we have that blank B hanging at the very bottom of the email. Just A, structure of podcast, and then, well, nothing, just B.
Honestly, that blank space is perhaps the most honest part of the entire document.
Really? Why?
Because it represents the unplannable reality of human free will. You can perfectly script the demographics. You can meticulously plan out the W-6 questions. You can even orchestrate the psychological intervention. But once that raw emotion is on the table, once the trauma or the fear has been exposed, the outcome cannot be scripted.
It's the moment after the therapist or the financial advisor asks the ultimate shattering question. The client is just sitting there in silence. The clock is ticking. The air is thick with tension. When you structure an emotional conversation that rigidly, reaching that blank B doesn't guarantee a signed contract or a perfect resolution. It just guarantees a profound human reaction.
Right. The client might realize they need the protection and sign the papers. Or the intervention might be too intense and they walk out the door and never speak to you again.
Which is the inherent risk, right, of using clinical psychological tools in a financial setting. You're opening doors that you may not actually be equipped to close.
Exactly. But the framework argues that without opening those doors, no real protection can be established.
To synthesize this wild ride, we started this deep dive looking at a few brief lines in a 2026 email thread from BetaCount. But within those lines, we uncovered a staggering architectural blueprint.
Yeah, it goes deep.
We moved from the cold, hard reality of demographics and the nuanced mapping of sociographics. We powered through the investigative interrogation of the W6, and we crashed straight into the explosive territory of family drama and psychology interventions.
All of it orchestrated.
Right, all of it orchestrated just to bridge that massive, terrifying gap between the dopamine hit of money and the heavy existential reality of protection. And we saw how that exact same structure serves as the ultimate narrative arc for a podcast.
So take a moment to think about your own financial protections.
Yeah.
Your own safety nets, your own insurance policies. When you review them, how are you viewing them?
Yeah, what's your lens?
Are you just looking at the demographics of your bank account, the numbers on the screen, the premium you pay every month? Or have you actually sat down and confronted the family drama, the deep-seated fears, and the psychological barriers that truly dictate your relationship with security? Have you run yourself through the W6, or are you still relying on the false security of unexamined numbers?
It is a lot to process. The architecture of our financial lives is built entirely out of human emotion, just masquerading as math.
Beautifully put.
But that leaves us with one final lingering implication to mull over today. We've spent this time analyzing how this demographics to intervention conversational blueprint is used to sell financial protection and how it mirrors compelling audio storytelling.
Right?
But if this architecture is so incredibly effective at bypassing our rational brains, dismantling our defenses, and triggering emotional action where else in our daily lives, is this exact same blueprint being run on us right now without us even realizing it?
Oh, that's a great question.
When you scroll through a targeted algorithmic feed or listen to a political speech or even use a fitness app, are you just reading data, or are you being systematically walked through a W6 interrogation straight into a psychological intervention designed to change your behavior? This has been your custom deep dive. We'll see you next time.